Legislation went into effect here in the United States on May 1st, the Anti-Semitism Act, and anti-Semitism as defined by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It's kind of important who's defining this, right? Because in certain countries and in certain legislation, if you say something that the other person perceives, like, it hurts their feelings, they don't like that. They perceive that as hate speech. It's very subjective. So, there are some people who might not like what's actually written in the Bible. Like Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, what God says he's going to do to his people when they turn away from him. And then what he actually did to his people who, you can't have it both ways. His people were Jews. And so when his people turn away, he has historically put them into slavery, taken away their land, done all kinds of things, right? Even the Holocaust. What was going on in Germany? I mean, you listen, you may not like it. It may not feel good to you, but this is what God's word says. So you either believe in it or you don't. God said to his people, which includes Christians now, if you obey me, here's what I'm going to do for you. If you disobey me, here's what I'm going to do to you. And he outlines some pretty wild stuff in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. If you don't know what God says he'll do, you should read that. And then tell me if God is sovereign or not. Like if he is of his word. Is he a man that he should lie? Was he just sort of bluffing in order to control his kids into behaving in a particular way? No, what was going on in Germany at that time is that Jews were reforming his word. They were reforming his word into Reformed Judaism in a movement called Wissenschaft des Judentums, the science of Judaism. So now we're going to not only reform his word, but we're going to make him bow down to the God of science who claims that there's no creator. Okay, that's not going to fare well, guys. So now we have the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance defining. So you have a group of Jews, not all Jews did not go through the Holocaust, guys. A group of Jews living in Germany, reforming his word, making him bow down to the God of science. God sends judgment, and now we're going to listen to those people, that particular set of Jews, Zionists. We're going to listen to them tell us what anti-Semitism is. Well, I can pretty much guarantee you that by their definition, what is written in the Word of God is anti-Semitic. It will be anti-Semitic under their definition. I spoke with you last week about Israel, this nation of Israel being the image of the Antichrist, the image of counterfeit Christianity. Israel in the Bible, according to God, not all who are descended from Israel are Israel. Oh, descended from Israel, what does that mean? I thought Israel was a land in the Middle East. No, it's not. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And Paul said, not all who are descended from Israel are Israel. There were Israelites before there was ever a land called Israel in 1948, as perpetuated by these counterfeit Jews. They're counterfeit Jews. A Jew in the Bible is one who is circumcised in heart. So, May 1st, 2024, faster than lightning. I mean, they always, there's always all this bureaucracy that people have to go through in order to get legislation passed, but boy, did they pass this one quick. Now there's a gag order on what you can say, and those parameters are defined by this group of people, by Zionists, which means anything that you say that they don't like is off the table. They can bring charges against you. And Revelation 13 says that the United States, the false prophet, is going to give power, give breath, life to that image of the Antichrist so that it's able to kill God's people. And it's able to make those whose names are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life receive a mark on their right hand and their forehead. And those who don't, who are God's people, who resist the Antichrist and will not bow down to this image of counterfeit Israel, those who will not bow down to it are going to die. It's going to make them die. It's not going to allow them to buy or sell. And I've been telling you for 2 years that this is going to rise in about a year and a half from now. Does it look a little closer than it did 2 years ago? Does it look like it might happen? Does it look like those such as myself, the witnesses, the 144,000 who are speaking this message, who are warning you to return, warning you that the time is short before Jesus returns, warning you that the Antichrist is going to rise and that you will be martyred if you're his? Does it look a little more like what I'm saying is not so crazy after all? Let's read a little bit about the law that went into effect on May 1st, and then we're going to read about the history of anti-blasphemy laws, because this is just a version of an anti-blasphemy law, and there's a whole history of that. There is a reason why we have not had those, but they're getting a little more popular now. Okay, I just picked the first article that came up. It's from The Hill, and it's entitled "The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act Bars the Teaching of Modern Jewish History." We wouldn't want to learn from history, would we? The writer, Mike Gold, whose Jews Without Money was arguably the most influential literary novel by a Jewish American in the mid-20th century, was a committed anti-Zionist. His funny and often tragic tale of working-class Jewish immigrants in New York City is a capacious, Whitman-esque cheer for the early 20th century Jewish life, celebrating Jewish gangsters, prostitutes, revolutionaries, peddlers, house painters, doctors, Hasidic rabbis, all but a lone figure, a Zionist dry goods merchant who rigs votes, undermines labor unions, and engages in racist real estate deals. Gold, who was also the editor of the equally influential left-wing arts and culture journal The New Masses, published other Jewish writers in the 1930s who shared his disdain for the Jewish nationalists in mandatory Palestine, referring to Zionists as fascists and to the revolutionist Zionist Vladimir Jabotinsky as a Jewish Mussolini. Boy, was he smart. He saw that coming in 1930, huh? And 1930, when was that? Was that maybe kind of around the Holocaust? He was calling out what was going on. Is he anti-Semitic too? Is he a self-hating Jew? No, he saw that what they were doing was wrong. I mentioned Gold as his novel and many essays would be all but inadmissible in my classroom and in Jewish studies classrooms should the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act pass the Senate. Well, it has. This law, requiring the Department of Education to adopt the definition of anti-Semitism put forth by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, says anti-Semitism is not only hatred of Jews, but includes 3 clauses about criticism of Israel. Well, guess what? No one's allowed to touch the witnesses for 1,260 days. I'm not afraid. I'm going to keep talking, because I know what the end story is anyway. I know that in the end, by the time that I finish, by the time I complete my testimony, that my testimony will have contributed to triumphing over the devil, making him lose his place in heaven, in the heavenly realms. So I count that more important than anything I'm about to suffer in less than a year and a half. Declaring Israel a racist endeavor or applying double standards to Israel that one would not apply to any other democratic nation, or drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis are, according to this act, equivalent to discriminating against or defaming Jewish people. Well, what are they doing then? What are they doing? They're essentially saying that they're a chosen race, that they're entitled to something because they're a chosen race. What did Hitler do then? He entitled himself and every other German to everything that belonged to the Jewish people. He killed them mercilessly. So tell me, what are they doing that's different? There is no other definition of bigotry in the world that equates criticism of a state, even harsh and unfair criticism, with discrimination or bigotry against the state's people. If one claimed that denunciations of the violent foundations of the Russian Empire are anti-Slavic or racist against Russians, we would immediately see through that as just an instrumentalist defense of Russian state interests. Perhaps the strangest part of the push for the government to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism as part of federal civil rights law is just how much Jewish history and culture would be banned from university classrooms and student organizations. Hannah Arendt, one of the most important Jewish philosophers of the 20th century and herself a Holocaust refugee, abandoned her youthful Zionism by the mid-1940s to become one of Zionism's most scathing critics when it became clear that Israel would become not a state for all its people, but only for Jews. By the way, many other Israelis are not for this. This is not a race issue. This is a Zionism issue. It is a satanic agenda issue. This has nothing to do with race. No one's saying that they hate Jews. They're saying that they hate this propaganda. They hate this ideology. And they hate the fact that these people are, in the name of God, murdering, committing genocide. And I cannot believe how many counterfeit Christians just support this, and they are all for it. Like there's blood dripping out of their mouths. That's how bloodthirsty they are. It's so sick. I can't believe that they call themselves Christian. Do we not understand God's commands that if you harbor hatred in your heart toward a brother or sister, that you have committed murder? And yet they will condone the actual physical murder of innocent children. This isn't about Hamas. This is about a stupid ideology in counterfeit Christianity that Israel is something that it's not. It is about that image that has been set up in counterfeit Christianity that Israel is something that it is not. Rabbi Elmer Berger, head of Reform Judaism's American Council for Judaism, went even further in the 1950s to claim that there is nothing in the Jewish tradition suggesting that Jews had a special ethnic right to a nation at all. Sigmund Freud referred to Zionism as baseless fanaticism. You know how I feel about Sigmund Freud. He's disgusting. He took the condition that God described, the sinful flesh, the heart, the spirit, and he turned him into the id, the ego, and the superego and wrote his own narrative. We are not going to exalt Sigmund Freud at all. Yuck. And yet this cokehead, who was sick enough to talk about children having some sort of sexual desire for their parents, okay? That's who Sigmund Freud is, said that little boys were afraid of their fathers because they were afraid that their father wanted to castrate them if they coveted their mother. This sicko could see that Zionism was baseless fanaticism. Albert Einstein referred to the Irgun, the pre-state Zionist paramilitary organization, as Nazis. These were Jews, by the way. Tony Kushner, Noam Chomsky, Abby Hoffman, Lenny Bruce, Philip Roth, Grace Paley, Jonathan Glazer, Walter Benjamin, Adrian Rich, Wallace Shawn, Daniel Boyarin, Sean McGee, Judith Butler, and Ed Asner are among countless other Jews would now be considered anti-Semitic under the new law, despite many not only being key figures in Jewish arts and letters, but leaders in the field of Jewish studies. The critique of Zionism among American Jews is not the idiosyncratic opinions of isolated Jewish individuals, but rather a strong living current in American Jewish secular and religious life. It represents long-standing Jewish traditions that criticize militarism, the violence of nation-states, and racial exclusion. Many ultra-Orthodox Jews oppose Zionism on religious grounds as usurping what only the Messiah can do, return the Jews to Jerusalem. And that's exactly right. That's exactly what the Bible says, that he's the one who's going to restore the kingdom to Israel. That's why in the book of Acts, the first chapter, the apostles were asking Jesus, are you now going to restore the kingdom to Israel? He wasn't saying, are you going to restore the kingdom to a land? He was saying, are you going to restore the kingdom to this people, Israel? And Jesus said, it's not for you to know the times the Father has set by his own authority. Elsewhere in the word, we know that God's people who are Israel, not counterfeit Jews. When Jesus extended salvation to the Gentiles, Gentiles became spiritual Jews as well through circumcision of the heart. Gentiles became engrafted in the commonwealth of Israel. They also are Israel. And we know from Jeremiah, from Ezekiel, we know, in particular Jeremiah, that the people were driven from the land, but that God would restore the land again. That's why he had Jeremiah buy that field. And he said that they would indeed be buying land again, purchasing land again. Now, all of this is understood to happen when the Messiah returns. This will happen when the Messiah returns. But they were driven from that land. So the fact that a group would rise and then say, no, we're entitled to this land based on race, by the way, how many races are there in Israel, guys? In the land of Israel, in the Middle East? There are a lot of different races. 1/3 of American Jews under 40 consider Israel's assault on Gaza to be a genocide, and 2/5 of American Jews of the same age range consider Israel to be an apartheid state. The new anti-Semitism law would in effect silence vast swaths of Jews within educational institutions. Obviously, they're trying to make a point in this article that they're trying to silence Jews. It doesn't really make sense. And we're not just, Jews are not the only ones with a mouth, by the way. But they're making a point that This isn't an issue of whether or not you are considered a Jew in the world. So are they now going to say, oh, you're not a Jew because you don't agree with us? I mean, are we calling this anti-Semitism? So the narrative is that if you don't agree with Zionists, then you are a self-hating Jew. You're the anti-Semite, but they can do whatever they want and silence other Jews from actually speaking what the word says. But they're not anti-Semitic. Okay, all right. You know what the word says in Revelation 2 and 3? It says, I'm going to make those who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan, bow down and acknowledge that I've loved you. All right? You should be able to see that right now. You should be able to see what that means right now. What an incredible time to be living through. The new anti-Semitism law would, in effect, silence vast swaths of Jews within educational institutions. It would, in some ways, be the most punitive law against Jews to be enacted in the U.S. since the Immigration Act of 1924. See, I'm going to say one thing about this, okay? I get their point of calling out how this is actually anti-Semitic and is against Jews. But, if we're going to keep separating people based on some supposed race, rather than speaking on the authority of God and what God is doing, we're going to keep ending up in a loop. And so now, they're trying to make a case based on the world. And while I appreciate the majority of the article, I don't think that this is the best approach. Well, I know that it's not the best approach, because if you speak on the authority of the one who sent you and you demonstrate what the word actually says, that's all the truth that we need. We don't need to go into this, they're being more anti-Semitic than blah, 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 blah. They are, that's the truth, but now we've just made something that's not actually a race issue by likening it to the Immigration Act of 1924. Do you see where we go wrong there? And this is what happens with people who speak on the authority of the world. We need to be speaking on the authority of the word. So now you just made a whole case for why this is not actually a race issue, and you're closing it up with making it a race issue. It's not going to be a good strategy. Of course, there are many Jews who believe that Israel represents them, and is inseparable from their form of Jewish religion or cultural practice. There are also, as I've laid out, many Jews who have, in letters and actions, signaled that Israel does not represent them or their conception of Jewish life and identity. In short, Congress has no business defining what it means to be Jewish. Of course, this is not only an intra-Jewish question. Silencing critics of Israel, okay, thank you for taking it there. There are other people on the planet, Silencing critics of Israel is a violation of free speech and academic freedom, ignores Palestinian narratives, and threatens voices calling for a peaceful future for all in the Holy Land. It also needs to be said that the appearance of the U.S. government taking sides in a contentious debate will only inflame those who feel Jews have too much power and are unfairly favored by the last global superpower. Well, it's in biblical prophecy, so it ain't going to happen. They're going to continue to testify to it and continue to give it power. At the risk of being overly subjective, there is something just very un-Jewish about such a law. Jewish custom is one alive with debate, dissonance, and disagreement. 2 Jews, 3 opinions is a well-known Jewish maxim describing a shared culture of robust, vigorous disagreement. And debate is more than just a Jewish value. It is an American value. The U.S. is not a country that defines public opinion by banning certain controversial ideas and perspectives. Well, actually, it does. I mean, you can say that. I understand, I think, what the author is saying, they shouldn't be allowed to, but they do. And so does Israel, by the way. I mean, they just banned Al Jazeera. So, this is their tactic, their strategy as well. If you ban it in the name of some made-up thing, this is racist, right? If you ban free speech in the name of racism, then you can distract everyone from understanding what's really going on. This is I don't know, this might seem like a really a different kind of example, but I'm going to say it because this is what God's putting on my heart. So God says throughout the Bible, I hate this and I hate that. He says it repeatedly. And then we grow up and our parents say, don't say hate, that's a terrible word. You need to say dislike. So now we're not allowed to call evil what it actually is, and we're not allowed to hate it, but you need to be tolerant of it. You need to just dislike it. Don't hate it. We don't say hate in this house. That's stupid. God says hate. Why don't we say hate? We're actually commanded to hate evil. Hello? And maybe if we understood that, then we wouldn't be tolerating this kind of nonsense. Because we'd be real clear that that what is going on, this genocide, is evil. And that we hate it. And debate is more than just a Jewish value. It is an American value. The U.S. is not a country that defines public opinion by banning certain controversial ideas and perspectives. Well, welcome to the new age. Welcome to the new, to a new thing. I mean, it's not even so much a new thing, right? I mean, the U.S. has come up with lots of narratives about communism and Russia and, all this other stuff, right? I listen to Vladimir Putin sometimes and I think, he sounds a little more sane than our president. But no, all my life and all my parents' lives, the big narrative was that communism was the enemy. Why does that narrative exist, guys? Who took down papal Rome? Who took down the Antichrist the first time? Communism. Napoleon took down papal Rome. So as long as you're looking at communism, you're not looking at the Antichrist, right? You're not looking at counterfeit Christianity. American universities have been the envy of the world for their support of academic freedom and independence from state coercion. Well, okay, that's interesting. Have you been to university? There might, I mean, I don't know if there's state coercion, but there's definitely coercion by Looney Tune professors. I mean, come on. Someone's always controlling the narrative. These are sacred principles of Jewish life and American life. I urge senators to vote no on this law. Sorry, friend, but the law has already gone into effect. So I don't know, when was this written? Let's see. I would actually say that was a pretty good article, I thought. I'm a little confused because the date on here that this was posted, I think, is 5/16/24, which is actually today. So I don't know. Are they posting something from 15 days ago or technically before that? Because this already passed. This passed on May 1st. So all in all, I thought it was a pretty good article. There's just, again, if you're going to speak on the authority of the world, you're always going to end up in a loop. If we have a fundamental agreement that the only truth is in God's word, then that's what we're speaking on, and that's what we're trying to rend our hearts to. You get into problems when you start speaking on the authority of the world. All right, let's look at the history of anti-blasphemy laws. The title of this article, so it's on why PBS, NPR. Okay, so not a fan of either, but I don't think I'm a fan of any news outlet. And this is interesting because this was actually written in 2012. So that's perfect because we won't have to hear their opinions of, what's going on right now. All right, this is dated October 9th, 2012. Anti-blasphemy laws have a history in America, and it's why.org, WHYY.org. In 2007, George Kallman received notice that he had violated a law against blasphemy, but Kallman wasn't in Pakistan, Egypt, or any of the other Middle Eastern countries that have burst into violence over an anti-Muslim YouTube video. No, Kallman was right here in Pennsylvania. After filling out a form to register his new film company as I Choose Hell Productions, LLC. Oh, how cute. The Downingtown resident got a letter informing him that his request was rejected under a state law barring blasphemy, profane cursing, or swearing in corporate names. Good. I mean, it just, tells me he's a moron. That's just a moronic thing to do. At the time, just 5 other states still had anti-blasphemy laws on the books, but such measures were ubiquitous across America for 3 centuries, from the founding of the colonies into the mid-20th century. As we try to understand the current anger and mayhem in the Middle East, then, we might pause to examine our own history of religious intolerance. Oh, what? There was mayhem and anger in the Middle East in 2012? I thought it just started with October 7th. Nope. It starts, like so much else, with the Puritans. Although we tell our kids that the Puritans came to the New World to find freedom, their laws tell another story. In 1636, for instance, the Massachusetts Bay Colony made blasphemy defined as a cursing of God by atheism or the like, punishable by death. Yeah, I agree. Those are not, Jesus gave everybody a choice about whether they were going to choose him. Within Israel, within the community of Israel, yes, there were laws like this. So I think that that's where they're getting it from, and also the Church of England and Catholicism. I certainly do not think that all Christian people were for this. In fact, I would say that such a law is not Christian. Because if Jesus wasn't doing this, then you don't get to do it. You don't get to just make up your own rules. So did the colony of Maryland in its famous 1649 Act of Toleration. We remember that law as granting rights to Catholics, forgetting that it omitted Jews. Indeed, the measure made it a capital crime to deny Jesus Christ as the Son of God. It also specified, that's what Jesus does, right? He makes it a capital crime. Come on. What did he say to Pilate? If my people or my kingdom was of this world, then my people would fight. But my kingdom's not of this world. You have a choice about whether you're going to accept God or not. You just have to know what the consequences are going to be in the end of the age. This is Catholic. It's Catholic and Church of England. That's what that is. Okay, so this is a problem when you start equating Catholics and Christians, because Catholics are not Christian. Neither are any of the prostitutes that bore out of her, including the Church of England. That's the problem. They're not defining Christians correctly. Okay, so it's famous 1649 Act of Toleration. We remember that law as granting rights to Catholics, forgetting that it omitted Jews. Indeed, the measure made it a capital crime to deny Jesus Christ as the Son of God. It also specified, do Jews remember this? Because they prostitute themselves to Catholicism and the Gregorian calendar and all of these things. They prostitute themselves to her all the time. It also specified death at the stake as the penalty for blasphemy, defined as a cursing or wicked speaking of God. Okay, so blasphemy against the Holy Spirit is speaking against the Holy Spirit. So they're not even really defining this correctly. But I guess in fairness, they're talking about just blasphemy in general. With the founding of the United States, the federal government and most states guaranteed religious liberty. But many states extended or even sharpened their anti-blasphemy laws on the curious grounds that America remained Christian. In 1811, for example, New York's highest court upheld the conviction of a man who had publicly declared that Jesus Christ was a bastard and his mother must be a whore. Charming. The court found that if the accused had insulted Islam or Buddhism, which the chief judge dismissed as superstitions, his speech would have been protected. But we are a Christian people, the judge continued, and the morality of the country is deeply engrafted upon Christianity and not upon the doctrines or worship of those impostors. Okay, so let's just be clear about something. We need to understand the difference between the Old Testament, in which there was a particular community, and what God was demonstrating, a community of Israel, let's be clear, which means the people, not the land, a community of Israel. And he said repeatedly that you must keep Israel pure, that there cannot be any evil. You have to purge the evil from Israel. So within your own community, within the community of Israel, people were stoned and they were killed for blasphemy. Once we were scattered among the nations, we don't get to go and impose things on pagans. Everyone has a choice about how they're going to live. And Israel made their choice about how they were going to live. They were driven from their land. Otherwise, they would have continued to remain there, and they would have continued to have their laws and everything else, and then the Messiah would have come. But we have to look at the example of what was done in the New Testament. So when Paul, for example, when that man was sleeping with his father's wife, Paul said to expel him from the group, from the church, and that he had already handed him over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. What they are doing, so what Paul was doing, let's draw a contrast. What Paul was doing is he was acknowledging God as the judge, acknowledging God as the one who's going to bring judgment on this person. What these people are doing in this article that we're reading is they're taking this matter into their own hands. Which did Jesus do? What did Paul do? What did the apostles do? Were they going around just killing people, burning them at the stake, collecting people to stone? No, they were the ones being stoned and burned at the stake and sawed in two and fed to wild animals. It was clear from the time that Jesus came here that these things were not allowed, and that you didn't just go out doing this to pagans, okay? Like when God had the Israelites take over the land, or different lands, rather, Canaan, Jericho, then he commanded them to go and take that land, and And he said, you're going to take over this land on account of the wickedness of these people. But God did not, these Zionists cannot claim that God has told them that, because it is completely against the word of God. And they're claiming that they're doing this in the name of God and by his word, that the word supports this. No, it does not support that. God has not told anyone to go in and take that land. And let me tell you how I know that. Because the fruit in the Bible, when God told the Israelites to go in and take the land, they went in and they took the land. That was it. It wasn't a 70-year war. It wasn't this mass, ongoing genocide for 70 years. So I'm telling you that if the fruit isn't there, God is not testifying that this is his handiwork. He is not doing this, at least not for the reasons they're saying. He is not supporting what they're claiming, or he would give them victory immediately, because that's what he did. That's what he did with the Israelites. Even Pennsylvania got in on the act, founded by the Quaker dissident William Penn, who had himself served 8 months in the Tower of London on a blasphemy charge. The colony began as a beacon of religious tolerance. See, we got to kind of wonder about this, okay? Because I know a little bit about the Quakers, and it seemed to me, first of all, I don't think anyone should be taking on any name other than Christian. So I don't like it when people are doing this. But the thing that I prefer, at least over calling yourself Lutheran or Calvin or Wesleyan or whatever, is that Quaker is not the name of a man. It's not talking about a human being. So it's not like they're idolizing some human being, at least in that name. So, but the Quakers actually maintained pretty good purity. And you have to understand that as they were coming out of these other nations where they were being oppressed by, for example, the Church of England or the Harlot Catholic Church, that it takes a while to get Babylon out of you. Even when you return to the purity of the word, God has to clean you up a bit. So I know this about the Quakers. I know that they were actually maintaining what I would say from the outside. Now, I don't know any more than what I've read from, historians. And that's not my Bible, right? But what I will say is that, okay, so if they're saying that they began as a beacon of religious tolerance, I want to understand, so what does that actually mean? Religious tolerance in comparison to the Church of England and the Harlot Catholic Church? I mean, that's everybody, because they were slaughtering people, okay? So religious tolerance in comparison to people who were burning Christians at the stake, because that could be different than something that we might call religious tolerance, which is people trying to unify all religions. I would not define that to be religious tolerance, that you're not going around killing everyone who doesn't identify as you do. What I would identify that as they're respecting people's religious freedom, and that is actually acting in accordance with the word of God and the example of God. Is he blowing people up right now because of their religions? No. It's not until the end of the age where they're going to receive their consequences. So that isn't his heart. That's not the way he's established it. But after independence, the state Supreme Court upheld in 1824 blasphemy conviction of a man who called the Bible a mere fable. Oh my goodness, I've heard that so many times. Oh, it's just, we don't even know if it's true. People just, writing stories and whatever else. Never once have I felt like, oh, I want to string you up on a pole and impale you, or, I've never felt like that. I've just felt like, get away from me. I have nothing in common with you. We don't have a basis by which we can speak anymore, because you don't have the Spirit of God. If you deny God, then who is the Word, right? The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. If you deny the Word, you have no truth in you. We don't have anything in common. I'm a believer. You're an unbeliever. Believers don't have anything in common with unbelievers. Doesn't mean I'm going to go feed them to a wild animal, drive them off a cliff. I'm not going to do any of that. Does that make me religiously tolerant? No, I don't tolerate falsehood. But I do respect people's right to believe what they're going to believe. And I also respect my responsibility to get away from them, to not associate with people who I have nothing in common with. In another context, the court allowed the accused words might have been legal. But when spoken in a Christian land and to a Christian audience, they were an insult directly tending to disturb the peace. Again, where is that in the Bible? Where does the Bible tell you that that's what you should do? It doesn't. You cast them out of the camp. You cast them out of the church. You don't allow them. The funny thing is, like, okay, so I'm saying these things, and there are probably, no doubt, there are going to be people who are going to listen, and they're going to think, no, this is right. This is what we should do. We want a combination of church and state. I'm a Christian nationalist. No doubt there are going to be people thinking this, right? And yet, what these very people do in their churches is they invite everybody in. And they don't even actually recognize the blasphemy that's being spoken in God's name, as though it comes from God. This is a perfect example of it. Hello? Oh, we want a combination of church and state. Okay, go ahead and campaign for the Antichrist, dum-dum. We support Israel. We support what Israel does. We support everything Israel does because we're going to get salvation through Israel. These are the very people who are going to disagree with what I'm saying about how God established things. He was not going around cutting pagans down at the knees. You want to be a pagan? Go be a pagan. But I'm going to exercise my right to free speech. Isn't that what Jesus did? He continued to speak the truth, didn't he? And then you know what happens in the end? Those who can hear the truth, they get harvested into the wheat pile, and those who can't get harvested into the weeds. This is not salvation by force, guys. Listen closely to the court's words, and you can hear echoes of anti-blasphemy campaigns in the contemporary Middle East and even in the United Nations, where, wow, they wrote this in 2012. Holy moly. Okay. Where several countries are demanding international bans on blasphemy. To be sure, these countries insist that they oppose insults against all religions, not just Islam. But across the Muslim world, vicious denunciations of Christians, Baha'is, I have never heard of that, BAHA apostrophe IS, I don't know what that is, and Jews have gone mostly unpunished. Okay, here's the reason I don't like PBS, because they're never on the side of they're never on the right side, ever. It says, this is a movement to defend Islam, plain and simple, just as America's forefathers tried to protect Christianity. What? Always going to be Israel leaning. Okay. The rationale was the same too. American Christians had a deep and passionate attachment to their ideas of a singular truth. There is a singular truth, okay? Not going to apologize for that. And they couldn't abide its violation without losing their sense of themselves. But anti-blasphemy laws were wrong then, just as they are wrong now. Again, you got to define Christian. You have to define Christian. There is a singular truth, and I'm not going to apologize for that. We just don't have any right to go kill people in order for them to, what, accept that truth? No, that's what counterfeit Christianity is going to do. And so this is why PBS or NPR, why they're taking this position, because they don't know the difference between a Christian and a counterfeit Christian. This is why they're using this language. They're lumping Christians into a category with counterfeit Christians who have done these things. So let's read it with that perspective. This is a movement to defend Islam, plain and simple, just as America's forefathers tried to protect counterfeit Christianity. The rationale was the same too. American counterfeit Christians had a deep and passionate attachment to their idea of a singular truth, and they couldn't abide its violation without losing their sense of themselves. I don't even know what that last sentence means, to be honest. It just sounds dumb. It just sounds like an attempt to malign a particular group. What do you mean? They couldn't abide its violation without losing their sense of themselves? Well, yeah. I mean, if you have a fundamental truth and someone else is speaking in a particular way, you're not going to abide that because truth is inherent to yourself, to your sense of self. It doesn't mean you're going to go kill them. That's why I say that's a stupid sentence. But anti-blasphemy laws were wrong then, just as they're wrong now. Wonder how they feel now. In 2024, this was written in 2012. Wonder how they feel now. I can almost guarantee you that they've totally changed their story, and they don't, and they probably don't even recognize the hypocrisy in that. But anti-blasphemy laws were wrong then, just as they are now. In 1825, in one of his last letters to his fellow ex-president Thomas Jefferson, John Adams called such measures great obstructions to the improvement of the human mind. How could the country promote free inquiry, Adams asked, if citizens encounter the risk of fine or imprisonment for speaking their minds? That brings us back to George Kallman, who was eventually allowed to keep his film company's name. In striking down Pennsylvania's blasphemy law in 2010, a federal judge noted that the measure let state officials bar certain words based on nothing but their own religious beliefs. That's what Middle Eastern protesters are trying to do too, while Americans look on in horror. But we did the same thing, and for longer than we like to admit. Even as we condemn the protesters for their ignorance and intolerance, we should also confess the sins of our own past. That's the only route to a better future for all of us. All right, I'd like a follow-up from Jonathan Zimmerman. How do you feel about that now? Unfortunately, this is not my favorite article. Obviously you've heard the gripes that I have with it. You need to make a distinction between Christianity and counterfeit Christianity in order to talk about history correctly. And so even this last statement, even as we condemn the protesters for their ignorance and intolerance, we should confess the sins of our own past. That ain't my past. I got a lot of sins, but I have never thought that anyone should be burned at the stake or killed or any of these things. That's God's right. Vindication is his. The one thing that I do take away from this article is that America has a history of implementing anti-blasphemy laws and bringing punitive action on people who disobey, who are speaking against what they don't believe. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with everyone having their own understanding. I mean, ultimately, there's only one truth that's going to save. But there isn't, God has already accounted for this. So if these people cannot hear the truth, you don't go kill them. You wait for God to do what he's going to do with the objects of his wrath. And who decides what truth is going to be shared? You know what I'm saying? Like, who gets to decide that? Who gets to draw up the parameters? Well, apparently, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And that's problematic and a little bizarre. It's a little bizarre that this other nation that has nothing to do with America is implementing legislation over here or influencing legislation over here. But see, I've told you, this is why. Because Revelation 13 tells us that the beast, the second beast, which is the false prophet, is going to give breath to this image so that it can cause all who do not bow down to it, who do not worship it, to be killed. You need to know that the Antichrist system has been here before. Counterfeit Christianity started by Papal Rome. And it wasn't just Papal Rome who persecuted God's people. It was also the Protestants that bore out of her. They were also persecuting God's people. Bloody Mary is an example. The witch trials are an example. And, of course, we have so many examples from the harlot, such as the Spanish Inquisition. So it's not the first time that legislation has gone into effect in order to control the narrative and keep truth from prevailing. And so what is Christian nationalism attempting to do? They are not going to tell you that this is what they're doing, and they may not even know how it is that they're being used by Satan, the Antichrist spirit. But what do you think it's going to result in when you have a combination of church and state? Exactly what we just read. There's going to be a controlling of narrative. There's going to be a controlling of speech. But those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life are not going to succumb to this. And they will lose their lives because of it. So, okay, I've been saying this for the last 2 years, more than the last 2 years. I've been talking about what God's been talking about with me. When I first started talking about it, people, for sure, thought that I was crazy. They said things to me like, oh, we've got more time. No, we don't. So is this materializing or not? For me, this totally blows me away. But the book of Daniel does warn us. It says that the wise are going to understand what's going on. The wicked will not. For me, at this point, I feel like this should be blatantly obvious. Like, why is it that people are still on the fence about this? Why is it that I'm still hearing responses from people like, well, it could be true? What do you mean it could be true? Have you seen this ever in your entire life? It could be true. So after, even if we look at just the last 2 years, I've been saying this is what's going on as it's happening, as he's revealing it to me. And you look back at that and you're like, oh, yeah, it could be. What do you mean it could be? He's revealed so much about what the mark of the beast is, the abomination of desolation, the image that is set up to the Antichrist, the false prophet. I mean, you've seen it materialize. You've seen it unfold if you've been listening to the channel that long. But here's what God does. And I was talking with people in the body about this the other day. Here's what he does. He will have me talk about something, and then he sits back to see what's going to happen. Who's going to listen? Who's going to obey? Who's going to return to him? And I will be honest that it's a little frustrating for me, because if he said that something was going to happen and then it happened right away, people would know, because they wouldn't lose interest. But see, what happens is I tell you something that he tells me, and he doesn't do it right away. He waits to see what you're going to do, and people lose interest. So that by the time he does it, usually in a way that we didn't imagine, people are like, yeah, well, it could be. It could be. It's so frustrating. Do you know how long Jeremiah was prophesying about the destruction of Israel? We're gonna take a look at it right now. So I want to remind you that when Jeremiah was prophesying, that he was like bound in the courtyard. They were digging a pit for him. I mean, they were doing all kinds of things to Jeremiah because they hated the things that he was saying, and they didn't believe him. Look how long he prophesied. Jeremiah 1. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests at Anathoth, in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah. Okay, there's one king. And through the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, an entire reign, down to the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah. 3 reigns, guys, into 3 reigns. Now, if Jeremiah said, hey, destruction is coming, and then God brought destruction, then the people would be like, oh, Jeremiah, they'd be following him around, right? Tell us more, tell us more. But God doesn't do it like that. He doesn't bring destruction right away. And he doesn't bring things exactly in the way that we think he's going to bring things. Why do you think Jonah was running? Why do you think that his prophets are always lamenting and grieving and suffering and running and being persecuted? Why do you think that is? Because I'll tell you exactly why, and I'll tell you what Jesus said. Because he tells them their ways are wrong. That's what he said to his brothers. You guys go to the festival, because they were saying, go to the festival, go to the festival. Even his brothers didn't believe. Anyone who wants to be known doesn't, makes themselves known, goes out into public. And he said, the world hates me because I tell it its ways are wrong. That's what every single prophet has done. By the time God has to send his prophets, it's because they are going to be warning about destruction coming. And that's what I've been doing with you guys. That's what I've been telling you. And that's what I will tell you for an entirety of 1,260 days. That Antichrist reign is coming. And if you don't return to him, you will have forsaken your salvation. And you have to know this, that once the Antichrist rises, no one else repents. Read Revelation 9. No one else repents. So it's not like you can say, well, I'm going to wait a little longer and I'm going to see if the Antichrist rises. I mean, you don't even know if you have tomorrow, okay? But once the Antichrist rises, no one else is going to return to God. Now, people will be repenting, so don't misunderstand. People will be repenting who have already returned to him. But if you haven't returned to him by then, you're not going to return to him then, because the word so states it. So it's incredible to me that people would discern the role that I'm in and then turn. Not even because they necessarily think that what I'm saying is not true anymore, but because they're unwilling to live the covenant that God has required them to live. They're unwilling to do basic things like observe God's Sabbath. All this lip service about how much they love Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And then okay, so why are you still working on Sabbath? So what about this aspect of your life? Like, you're telling me all the things that Jesus has done for you. What have you done for him? Now he's telling you that these are the things that you need to do in your covenant. And you're like, I'm out. No one who puts their hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of heaven. They're not worthy of Jesus. Please discern this message with God. Please ask him if the things that I've been saying for the last 2 years, over 2 years, if this is true, if that Antichrist is going to rise in the next year and a half. I don't have anything that I take from you or receive from you. There is no other reason why I'm doing this. I do exactly as Paul said. He did not want anything to hinder anybody being able to receive the gospel. That is exactly the way that God has raised me to speak to you. There's nothing that I take, so that the only thing that I ask of you is go discern what I say with God.